But for all that there was no lull, yet in the admiring exclamations of the professor. See, he went on, both asking the question and supplying the answers. Isn't it a beauty? Yes, splendid. Did you ever see such a binding? Doesn't the book open so easily? Yes, it opens anywhere. But does it shut equally well? Yes, for the binding and the leaves are flush, all in a straight line, and no gaps or openings anywhere. And look at its back. After 700 years, why, Bozerian Claus of Pergloid might have been proud of such a binding. While rapidly making these comments, my uncle kept opening and shutting the old tome. I really could do no less than ask a question about its contents, although I did not feel the slightest interest. "And what is the title of this marvelous work?" I asked with an affected eagerness which he must have been very blind not to see through. "This work," replied my uncle, firing up with renewed enthusiasm, "this work is the Heimskringla of Snorre Turleson, of the most famous Icelandic author of the 12th century. It is the chronicle of the Norwegian princes who ruled in Iceland." "Indeed," I cried, keeping up wonderfully. "Of course it is a German translation." "What?" sharply replied the professor. "A translation? What should I do with a translation? This is Icelandic original, and a magnificent idiomatic vernacular, which is both rich and simple, and admits of an infinite variety of grammatical combinations and verbal modifications." "Like German," I happily ventured. "Yes," replied my uncle, shrugging his shoulders. "But in addition to all this, the Icelandic has 3 numbers like the Greek, and irregular declensions of nouns proper like the Latin." "Ah," said I, a little moved out of my indifference. "And is this type good?" "Type! What do you mean by talking of type, wretched Axel? Type? Do you take it for a printed book, you ignorant fool? It is a manuscript, a runic manuscript." "Runic?" "Yes, do you want me to explain what that is?" "Of course not," I replied in the tone of an injured man. But my uncle preserved it and told me against my will of many things I cared nothing about. Runic characters were in use in Iceland in former ages. They were invented, it is said, by Odin himself. Look there and wonder, impetuous young man, and admire these letters, the invention of the Scandinavian god. Well, not knowing what to say, I was going to prostrate myself before this wonderful book, a way of answering equally pleasing to gods and kings, and which has the advantage of never giving them any embarrassment when a little incident happened to divert conversation into another channel. This was the appearance of a dirty slip of parchment, which slipped out of my volume and fell upon the floor. My uncle pounced upon this shred with incredible avidity. An odd old document, enclosed in a more immemorial time within the folds of this old book, had for him an immeasurable value. "What's this?" he cried. He laid out upon the table a piece of parchment 5 inches by 3, and along which were traced certain mysterious characters. Here is the exact facsimile. I think it is important to let these strange signs be publicly known, for they were the means of drawings on Professor Liedenbrock's and his nephew to undertake the most wonderful expedition of the 19th century. The professor mused a few moments over the series of characters, then raising his spectacles, he pronounced, "These are runic letters. They are exactly like those of the manuscript in Snorre Turleson. But what on earth is their meaning?" Runic letters appearing to my mind to be an invention of the learned to mystify this poor world. I was not sorry to see my uncle suffering the pangs of mystification. At least so it seemed to me, judging from his fingers, which were beginning to work with terrible energy. "It is certainly old Icelandic," he muttered between his teeth. "And Professor Liedenbrock must have known, for he was acknowledged to be quite polyglot. Not that he could speak fluently in 2,000 languages and 12,000 dialects which are spoken on earth, but he knew at least his share of them. So he was going in the presence of this difficulty to give way to all the impetuosity of his character, and I was preparing for a violent outbreak when 2 o'clock struck by the little timepiece over the fireplace. At the moment our good housekeeper Martha opened the study door, saying, "Dinner is ready." I'm afraid he sent that soup to where it would boil away to nothing, and Martha took to her heels for safety. I followed her, and hardly knowing how I got there, found myself seated in my usual place. I waited a few minutes. No professor came. Never within my remembrance had he missed this important ceremonial of dinner. And yet what a good dinner it was! There was a parsley soup, an omelette of ham garnished with spiced sorrel, a fillet of veal with composite of prunes for dessert, crystallized fruit, the whole washed down with the sweet mausolée. All this my uncle was going to sacrifice to a bit of old parchment. As an affectionate and attentive nephew, I considered it my duty to eat for him as well as for myself, which I did consistently. "I have never known such a thing," said Martha. "M. Liedenbrock is not at the table." "Who would have believed it?" I said with my mouth full. "Something serious is going to happen," said the servant, shaking her head. My opinion was that nothing more serious would happen than an awful scene when my uncle should have discovered that his dinner was devoured. I had come to the last of the fruit when a very loud voice tore me away from the pleasures of my dessert. With one spring, I bounded out the dining room into the study. The runic writing exercises the professor. "Undoubtedly it is runic," said the professor, bending his brows, "but there is a secret in it, and I mean to discover the key." A violent gesture finished the sentence. "Sit there," he added, holding out his fist toward the table. "Sit there and write." I was seated in a trice. "Now I will dictate to you every letter of our alphabet which corresponds with each of these Icelandic characters. We will see what they will give us, but, by St. Michael, if you should dare to deceive me—" The dictation commenced. I did my best. Every letter was given me one after another, with the following remarkable result. When this work was ended, my uncle tore from the paper for me and examined it attentively for a long time. "What does it all mean?" he kept repeating mechanically. Upon my honor, I could not have enlightened him. Besides, he did not ask me, and he went on talking to himself. "This is what I call a cryptogram or cipher," he said, "in which letters are purposely thrown in confusion, which if properly arranged would reverse their sense. Only think that under this jargon there may lie concealed the clue to some great discovery." As for me, I was of opinion that there was nothing at all in it, though of course I took care not easy to say so. Then the professor took the book and the parchment and diligently compared them together. "These two writings are not by the same hand," he said. "This cipher is of the later date than the book, an undoubted proof of which I see in a moment. The first letter is a double M, a letter which is not to be found in the Turleson's book, and which was only added to the alphabet in the 14th century. Therefore there are 200 years between the manuscript and the document." I admitted that this was a strictly logical conclusion. "I am therefore led to imagine," continued my uncle, "that some professor of this book wrote these mysterious letters. But who was the professor? Is his name nowhere to be found in the manuscript?" My uncle raised his spectacles, took up the strong lens, and carefully examined the blank pages of the book. On the front of the second, the title page, he had noticed a sort of stain which looked like an ink blot, but in looking at it very closely he thought he could distinguish some half-effaced letters. My uncle at once faced it upon this at the center of the interest, and he labored at the blot until by the help of his microscope he ended by making out the following runic characters, which he read without difficulty. "Arne Sakensome," he cried in triumph. "Why, that is the name of another Icelander, a savant of the 16th century, a celebrated alchemist." I gazed at my uncle with satisfactory admiration. "Those alchemists," he resumed, "Aventia Bacon, Lolly Paracelsus, were the real and only savants of their time. They made discoveries at which we were astonished. Has not this Sacanusium concealed under his cryptogram some surprising invention? It is so. It must be so." The professor's imagination took fire at this hypothesis. "No doubt," I ventured to reply, "but what interest would have in this thus hitting so marvelously a discovery?" Why, how can I tell? Did not Galileo do the same by Saturn? We shall see. I will get the secret of this document. I will neither sleep nor eat until I found it out." My comment on this half was suppressed. "Oh, nor you either, Axel," he added. "The deuce," I said to myself. "Then it is lucky I have eaten 2 dinners today." First of all, we must find out the key to this cipher. That cannot be difficult. At these words, I quickly raised my head, but my uncle went on solemnizing. "There's nothing easier in this document. There are 132 letters. viz. 77 consonants and 55 vowels. This is the proportion found in southern languages, while northern tongues are much richer in consonants. Therefore, this is in southern language. These were very fair conclusions, I thought. But what language is it? Here I looked for a display of learning, but I met instead with profound analysis. This Saknussemm, he went on, was a very well-informed man. Now, since he was not writing in his own mother tongue, he would naturally select that which was currently adopted by the choice spirits of the 16th century. I mean Latin. If I am mistaken, I can but try Spanish, French, Italian, Greek, or Hebrew. But the savants of the 16th century generally wrote in Latin. I am therefore entitled to pronounce this a priori to be Latin. It is Latin. I jumped up in my chair. My Latin memories rose in revolt against the notion that these barbarous words could belong to the sweet language of Virgil. Yes, it is Latin, my uncle went on, but it is Latin confused and disorder. Perturba su indornita, as Euclid has it. Very well, thought I, if you can bring order out of that confusion, my dear uncle, you are a clever man. Let us examine carefully, said he, began taking upon the leaf upon which I had written. Here is a series of 132 letters in apparent disorder. There are words consisting of consonants only as neurals, others, on the other hand, in which vowels predominate, as for the instance, the fifth unif, or the last one but of usibu. Now, this arrangement has evidently not been premeditated, but it has arisen mathematically in obedience to the unknown law which has ruled in the succession of these letters. It appears to me a certainty that the original sentence was written in a proper manner, and afterward distorted by law which we have yet to discover. Whoever possesses the key of this cipher will read it with fluency. What is that key, Axel? Have you got it? I answered not a word, and for a very good reason. My eyes had fallen upon a charming picture suspended against the wall. The portrait of Graben, my uncle's ward at the time at Altonia, staying with a relation, and in her absence I was very downhearted, for I may confess to you now, the pretty Verdelins, the professor's nephew, loved each other with a patience and calmness entirely German. We had become engaged unknown to my uncle, who was too much taken up with theology to be able to enter into such feelings as ours. Graben was a lovely blue-eyed blonde, rather given to gravity and seriousness, but that did not prevent her from loving me very sincerely. As for me, I adored her. If there is such a word in the German language, thus it happened that the picture of my pretty Virtualis threw me in a moment out of the world of realities, that of a memory of fancy. There looked down upon me the faithful companion of my labors and my recreations. Every day she helped me to arrange my uncle's precious specimens. She and I labeled them together. Mademoiselle Graben was an accomplished mineralogist. She could have taught a few things to a savant. She was fond of investigating abstruse scientific questions. What pleasant hours we have spent in study, and how often I envied the very stones which she handled with her charming fingers. Then, when our leisure hours came, we used to go out together and turn into the shady avenues by the Alster, and went happily side by side up to the old windmill, which formed such an improvement to the landscape at the head of the lake. On the road we chatted hand in hand. I told her amusing tales at which she laughed heartily. Then we reached the banks of the Elbe, and after having bid goodbye to the Swan sailing gracefully amid the white water lilies, we returned to the quay by the steamer. That is just where I was in my dream, when my uncle, with a vehement thump on the table, dragged me back to the realities of life. "Come," said he, "the very first idea which would come into anyone's head to confuse the letters of a sentence would be to write the words vertically instead of horizontally." "Indeed," said I. "Now we must see what will be the effect of that. Axel, put down upon this paper any sentence you like, only instead of arranging the letters in the usual way, one after the other, place them in succession in vertical columns, so as to group them together in 5 or 6 vertical lines." I caught his meaning, and immediately produced the following literary wonder. "I love you well, my wonderful Graben." "Good," said the professor, without reading them. "Now set down those words in a horizontal line." I obeyed, with the result, I, Y, lo, larb, onge, wunden, ja. "Excellent," said my uncle, taking the paper hastily out of my hands. This begins to look just like an ancient document. The vowels and the consonants are grouped together in equal disorder. There are events in capitals in the middle of words and commas too, just as in Saknussemm parchment. I considered these remarks very clever. Now, said my uncle, looking straight at me, to read the sentence which you have just written, at which I am wholly unacquainted, I shall only have taken the first letter of each word, then the second, the third, and so forth. And my uncle, to his great astonishment and much greater, read, I love you well, my own dear Gräuben. Hello, cried the professor. Yes, indeed, without knowing what I was about, like an awkward and unlucky lover, I had compromised myself by writing this unfortunate sentence. Aha! You are in love with Gräuben? He said, with the right look for a guardian. Yes, no, I stammered. You love Gräuben, he went on once or twice dreamily. Well, let us apply the process I have suggested to the document in question. My uncle, falling back into his absorbing contemplations, had already forgotten my imprudent words. I merely say imprudent, for the great mind of so learned a man, of course, had no place for love affairs, and happily the grand business of the document gained me the victory. Just as the moment of the supreme experiment arrived, the professor's eyes flashed right through his spectacles. There was a quivering in his fingers as he grasped the old parchment. He was deeply moved. At last he gave a preliminary cough, and with profound gravity, naming in succession the first and second letter of each word, he dictated me the following. Secta sur affis signiferum a certain rosivia insarte lacarnive insarte sarbenic merciful esenci. I confess I felt a bit considerably excited in coming to the end. These letters, named once at a time, had carried no sense to my mind. I therefore waited for the professor with great pomp to unfold the magnificent but hidden Latin of this mysterious phrase. But who could have foretold the result? A violent thump made the furniture rattle and spilled some ink, and my pen dropped from between my fingers. That's not it, cried my uncle. There's no sense in it. Then, darting out like a shot, bowling downstairs like an avalanche, he rushed into the conclaves and fled.